Hi, it's Brian. Welcome to the Awards Contender, and here is my early, no spoiler review of Dune Part 2. So, to start things off here, I'm not the biggest fan of the first Dune film from 2021. I liked it, I admired it, I think it looks gorgeous, the actors are fantastic. But even rewatching Dune again a few days ago before I went to see Dune Part 2, it doesn't fully work for me the way it works for most people. It just doesn't emotionally engage me the way I want it to. However, in watching it again recently, it did get me excited for what Dune Part 2 could deliver. In many ways, the first Dune film seems to be setting up a lot of things, a lot of character arcs, a lot of plot events that the second film is going to dive in right from the get-go. And so yeah, even though I'm not as hot on Dune as many are, I was still very much anticipating the sequel, Dune Part 2. It was supposed to come out in November, and then due to the actors' strike, it got pushed back to March, and I got to see a sneak preview on Sunday night with a packed house in my one and only IMAX theater here in Reno, Nevada. And before the film began, you could feel this charge in the air. Everybody was really excited. There has definitely been a huge lull at the movie theaters, especially in terms of big event movies. Since Barbenheimer last July, there hasn't been much. And the nearly 3 hours of Dune Part 2 is extraordinary. This is a much better film, I think, than the 2021 first installment. It's not perfect. I'm not going to call it a masterpiece, but this is a pretty damn good movie that blew me away on multiple occasions. There are sequences in Dune Part 2 where I was like, holy effing shit. Denis Villeneuve is not messing around in this sequel. Dune Part 2 in many ways did feel like the Dark Knight of this supposed trilogy. I believe there's going to be a third Dune, Dune Messiah, in the years to come. And yeah, they're gonna make a third one. Dune Part 2 is way too good of a movie to not get a third installment. This thing is going to do huge box office numbers because the word of mouth is going to be very strong. If you love the first Dune film, you are going to go ballistic over the sequel. I liked certain elements, as I said, about the first movie. Many of the issues I had with the first movie are for the most part not on display in Dune Part 2. I mean, something that does help with the second installment is that we have been introduced to many of the characters. We understand their motivations, what they want, and so when we get into this second half of the story, there's not as much confusion. You don't need all the introductory scenes to this person and that person outside of a few new characters we do get in Dune Part 2. This is very much a continuation of a journey, and if you liked the action in the first movie, the action in Dune Part 2 is some of the most stunning work I have seen on a giant IMAX screen. So much of visual effects in big event movies these days doesn't feel tangible. It doesn't feel real. You're watching a narrative play out, and you just know in your mind what you're watching is computer-generated effects all the way through, and it doesn't move you. It doesn't mean anything, especially in the last few Marvel movies, I would say. And one of the best aspects to Dune Part 2 is the tangible quality of the effects. You feel like they're really in the desert. The creatures on display seem to really be there. And so for most of this running time, you really feel the tension and the stakes, whether we're spending time with the protagonist played by Timothée Chalamet, or we're spending time with a new fabulous villain played by Austin Butler. There is just so much great work going on in this movie, on a narrative level, on a technical level. The cast in the first film was great. In this sequel, It's kind of bonkers insane. Not only do we have most of the people who showed up in the first Dune film, in this sequel we also get Butler and Florence Pugh and Christopher Walken. Christopher Walken, who I'm like, I can't remember the last time I saw him in a film. Like it's been a while. I love Christopher Walken going back to when I was a kid, and it was so great to see him here in a very important role. I just felt so many elements of Dune Part 2 improved on Dune Part 1. Starting with the cast, they're all doing fantastic work. I liked Timothée Chalamet's performance in the first film, but he is on another level in this sequel. Like going back to Call Me By Your Name, his Oscar-nominated performance in Call Me By Your Name, Chalamet time and time again has proven he's got the stuff, that he can be a fantastic actor when the material is there, and the arc he has in Dune Part 2 is fascinating. I have never read this book before. I didn't know where this movie was going, especially in terms of his character, and the last hour, I was like, oh, that's what's happening here. This is what he's doing. Interesting. I didn't expect that. Again, this is a no spoiler review. I will not tell you what happens to Paul at the end. But this film, this screenplay gives Timothée Chalamet a lot to chew on, and he is more than up to the task. I loved his arc. I loved his relationship, his romance with the Zendaya character, who was basically a cameo in the first movie. She was like in his dreams, and we'd see her across the way in bright light, and Zendaya in this sequel gets a lot more to do. It's a much more substantial character who plays such a pivotal role in the narrative, and they have excellent chemistry. I love the way the relationship evolves between them as well, and it was great to see Rebecca Ferguson and Javier Bardem and Josh Brolin again. They are all excellent as always, but my favorite performance and character in Dune Part 2 is by far Austin Butler as Feyd-Rautha. He is not in the movie for a while. Because Dune Part 1 bounced around to a lot of different narratives all throughout, I thought that editing style would continue into Dune Part 2, but that's not always the case. There are characters we will see briefly, but then not again for 30 minutes to an hour, and we don't see Butler's character for a while. I knew, obviously, having followed the marketing of this movie, that Butler was in it and he had a substantial role, so I kept waiting for him and waiting for him. I'm like, when is he coming in here? And when he does, it is spectacular. After having seen him in Elvis and Masters of the Air, and then the upcoming The Bike Riders, which is coming out this summer, Austin Butler with Dune Part 2 continues to prove he is a major movie star. He takes a role that I do think with another actor could have just been so-so. Like, this needed somebody with a lot of presence and confidence, and Butler is not afraid to go extremely dark. This is not a performance you have ever seen from this actor, and I found it to be very exciting. I love when there's an actor who's mostly known for playing good guys, protagonists, and then they get a really cool opportunity to go dark. I'm thinking again of The Dark Knight and Heath Ledger as the Joker. Austin Butler is not in that league in Dune Part 2, but he's great, guys. You are going to love his performance. He's so creepy and sinister. He is fantastic in this, so electric and alive, and I almost wanted him to be in more of the movie. There are big chunks that he's not in, but that also adds an element of mystery to him as well, so that was really cool. Now, if there's one new actor to the franchise I wish could have gotten a little bit more to do in Dune Part 2, it is Florence Pugh. She opens the film. She is the first face we see at the very beginning, and then she disappears for a long while, and she's got a few scenes here and there, but kind of like how I felt she wasn't in Oppenheimer enough a few months ago. I felt like Pugh is underutilized in Dune Part 2. I didn't need her to be in like every other scene, but she does play a pivotal role at the end, and I kind of wanted to get to know her character a little bit more. But yeah, the cast is great, the narrative is very compelling, especially as we get deeper and deeper into these character motivations. And then if you are going to Dune Part 2 for the action, you are not going to be disappointed. There are at least 3 sequences in this movie that took my breath away, that were astonishing on an IMAX screen. Like, my seat was rumbling, the sound design in Dune Part 2 is spectacular. You feel like you're part of the movie sometimes. Like, if you see this in the right venue, you are going to go on a wild ride, trust me. Denis Villeneuve continues to grow as a filmmaker. I do think with every movie he makes, he becomes more and more of a confident visual stylist. Dune Part 2 is his most giant movie to date by far, and the vision he brings to these action sequences are astonishing. There is a shot, I'm not going to give anything away, as I said, but I'm just going to say there is one shot where something explodes out of the sky and everything goes quiet for a moment as 2 of our main characters start running in the foreground. It remains silent for a few seconds, and then that aircraft comes crashing down behind them, this massive explosion, and of course the sound just goes crazy. And I'm like, that was a shot that had a lot of thought put into it. It could have just been a shot from the sky, seeing the aircraft hit the ground, move on to the next scene. And so Denis Villeneuve finds these fascinating visual touches, some small, some large, that are just amazing. And you're like, damn, the movies are very much alive. I was so happy and excited watching Dune Part 2. Even though I wouldn't call it a masterpiece, it does have a couple pacing issues here and there. It did feel to me in many ways like a return to form of mega blockbuster filmmaking, the likes we haven't had since like the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I mean, Dune Part 2 feels like it costs $400 million. They spared no expense here. Whatever this movie cost, I don't even know. Like, you see it on the screen, and again, it's tangible. It's not like you're just watching bloated special effects for 2.5 hours that mean nothing. There is a reason and a purpose to each visual effect, and they help guide this often very compelling story all the way to its conclusion. Now, when I say pacing issues and why I'm not giving Dune Part 2 a 10 out of 10 or even a 9 out of 10, I do think there are 2 or 3 sequences in the movie that do kind of lumber along a little bit, that didn't fully engage me in a way I wanted them to. I do think the first 45 minutes or so of the movie does take a little while to get going. There are some great individual moments in the first act of the movie, but I felt like it could have been tightened a little bit. And then, weirdly enough, I think the middle hour of Dune Part 2 is essentially perfect. I would say the middle hour, hour 20, is pretty rock solid, awesome. I was all in. I thought, okay, I might have had a couple pacing issues near the beginning, but I am all in now, and this is really working for me. But then, oddly, I did find the film sagging a little bit in the third act, especially the last 30 minutes or so. This is not a film I felt where we are slowly ticking upward, and the last half hour of the movie is the best material in the narrative. I didn't feel that with Dune Part 2. I did start to feel the length a little bit. This is not a movie I was like, man, this could go on for another hour and I would be happy. Dune Part 2, I have to be honest, you did feel the 2 hours and 45 minutes length here. At some point, I was kind of exhausted and needed to catch my breath, you know? So yeah, Dune Part 2 is not the movie of the year for me, but it's pretty frickin' awesome. Most of you are going to be knocked out by this movie. You're going to want to see it over and over again. It's going to do huge box office numbers. And I do think, a year from now, we are going to see Dune Part 2 get some Oscar nominations. Now, it's way too soon to really think that far in advance. I mean, can Dune Part 2 get a Best Picture nomination? Can it show up in the top 8 categories? I mean, we're so far out from that. I do wonder. I mean, The Batman is a movie I loved even more than Dune Part 2 from 2 years ago. And I wondered that March and April, could that get a Best Picture nomination? Can that do really well at the Oscars? And it only showed up in 3 tech categories, but I do think Dune Part 2 is a better film than the first one. And the first Dune won 6 Academy Awards, and it got a Best Picture nomination. So, I mean, I feel like if the enthusiasm is there and people hold this movie in their hearts for many months to come, I mean, Oppenheimer came out in July, and it's the big awards player right now. Everything Everywhere All at Once came out in April of 2022 and went on to sweep. So if your movie is strong enough, it doesn't really matter if it's out in February, March, April, something like that. Dune Part 2 is going to play a role next award season, and before that, it's going to be, I think, for many, many, many people, one of their 10 favorite films of the year. I don't know if I'm going to rank it that high right now. It's still very early, but this is an excellent film, one of the best sequels I have seen in many, many years. Dune Part 2 is blockbuster filmmaking at its finest. What an astonishing cast. The action sequences are terrific, and the cinematography, the sound design, the music, the visual effects, everything is top-notch on a technical level in this movie. I am just so impressed with Dune Part 2, and I'm already excited for the upcoming Dune Messiah, which we know is happening. I think you're going to love Dune Part 2 even more than I did. I give this film an 8.5 out of 10. Thanks so much for watching and subscribing, and let me know in the comments below what you thought of Dune Part 2. Do you think it's even better than the first installment? We'll see you next time at the Awards Contender.